When people talk of wealth beneath the sea, one tends to think of oil or Spanish galleons. But there are other riches too beneath Britain's shallow coastal waters. The finest of our marine communities is found here in the Bristol Channel beneath the stark granite cliffs of the island of Lundy. Lundy, about 3 miles long by half a mile wide, lies 12 miles off the North Devon coast. Much of the marine life round its shores comes from the mainland, but it shelters other creatures too, from as far away as the Mediterranean. The wealth and variety of this underwater environment led in November 1986 to the declaration of Lundy's waters as Britain's first marine nature reserve. The reserve extends for about a mile in all directions from Lundy's shore, a mile of some of our most valuable and varied marine habitats, Lundy's Golden Mile. Perhaps the island's best-known residents are the puffins. In fact, the name Lundy originates from the Icelandic Lunda, meaning puffin. The birds were once very common. 40 or 50 years ago, over 7,000 lived here. Today, there are 70 or so breeding in crevices in the cliffs. The kittiwakes have also declined in number, although not as dramatically as the puffins. They'll spend most of the spring and early summer nesting on inaccessible ledges. Razorbills fish for sand eels in the waters around the island and lay their eggs ashore in shallow depressions in the exposed rock. Between feeding sorties, guillemots rest in the sun. Both forms occur here, the normal variety and the bridal guillemot with a white eye stripe. Along the more sheltered parts of Lundy's coasts, grey seals laze in the calm waters. A young pup, born last autumn, exhales and bottles down to the seabed to doze. There it'll sleep for 5 or 10 minutes under the watchful eye of a nearby adult. Once the oxygen in its lungs is used up, it returns to the surface to breathe. The 80 or so grey seals that live around the island spend most of their time within Lundy's Golden Mile. They share their home with a wide variety of marine plants and animals now protected within the boundaries of the reserve. Within the surge gullies, which are swept twice daily by the falling tide, Tubularia finds its food. Tubularia is a colonial hydroid, rather like a coral, made up of dozens of individual animals or polyps. Each one extends its tentacles into the gentle current to feed on tiny particles and plankton floating in the water. Tubularia's flexible stalks provide a home for creatures such as the tiny skeleton shrimp. This female, no bigger than a fingernail, has a pouch on her underside bursting with young. She must wait until the water is calm for less than an hour between tides before she can release them. The dozen or so young emerge from the female's pouch as perfect miniature replicas of the adult. Now is a critical time for them. Skeleton shrimps may be small, but they're voracious predators, and the female could easily mistake one of her offspring for a meal. The tubularia, while it provides a home for some creatures, provides food for others. The polyps are eaten by sea slugs, marine relatives of our garden pests. The majority are carnivorous, and hydroids such as tubularia are a favourite food. The sea slug's simple heart can be seen beating beneath its smooth, translucent skin. Sea slugs, or nudibranchs, vary greatly in shape, colour and size, although few reach as much as an inch in length. The waters round Lundy are famous for the variety of species to be found here. The bright colours of this handsome species serve as a warning to predators that it tastes disgusting. It's rare elsewhere, but it's common around Lundy. The shallow coastal waters are bathed in sunlight and rich in plant life. They're the home of another spectacular creature. A lion's mane jellyfish catches food by trailing long tentacles armed with stinging cells through the water. But the young whiting is completely safe. Whiting are often found associated with the lion's mane and seem to be immune to its stinging cells. No one knows how it does this, but it's likely that the whiting acquires a protective layer of jellyfish mucus around its body. The stinging cells don't fire because the mucus feels like just another tentacle. The sea cucumber lives permanently on the sea floor. It's not a plant, but an animal, a close relative of the starfish and the sea urchin. Although it's the same size and shape as a cucumber, it's soft and hollow. It moves along the seabed on its tube feet, just like a starfish, and it feeds by hoovering up particles with its large, specially modified feet. It breathes by pumping oxygen-rich water through its body via its muscular cloaca. At first glance, it looks defenseless, a large, easy meal for any predator. The sleepy crab, that's its name, lives mainly by scavenging, and the dozy movements of the sea cucumber make it look a simple target, but they conceal an unexpected line of defense. The cucumber ejects long, white, sticky threads from its rear end. They're produced from glandular organs inside its body, and very soon the crab becomes completely entangled. The threads not only stick to the attacker, but to any nearby weeds or rocks, rendering the crab completely immobile. This unique behavior has earned the sea cucumber a nickname among fishermen. They call it the cotton spinner. while the crab is left to sort out the sticky mess, the sea cucumber can beat a leisurely retreat. Beneath the rocky shores and swirling currents of Lundy Island, a whole community of marine life lies hidden from view. A male corkwing wrasse is busy working on his nest. The nest is built of coralline seaweed wedged between large boulders. It's sheltered from the tides, but it still needs to be maintained. The brightly coloured male hopes to attract a female to his nest to spawn, so it's important that he and his nest look in good shape. But his duties won't end there. Once the eggs are laid, it's the male who defends and tends the nest until they hatch. Many of the creatures that live in areas exposed to the full force of the current are permanently anchored to the seabed. A fanworm repairs its tube using a mixture of mucus and silt. It's shaped by paddling movements of the two large palps. The fanworm can retract into its tube at the slightest hint of danger, but in the meantime its tentacles continue to filter food from the sea. The Devonshire cup coral extends its tentacles in the same way, but it feeds more like a jellyfish. Each tentacle is armed with a barrage of stinging cells called nematocysts, with which it stuns its prey. Around the base of the coral, a ring of little barnacles shelters beneath this protective shield. They too extend their long, feathery limbs to feed. They literally kick food particles into their mouths. The barnacles gain protection and an elevated feeding position from their association with the coral. The coral, on the other hand, gains nothing. In fact, it loses, because the barnacles compete with it for food. Deeper down, a group of golden feather hydroids sways in the increasing current. The tide is on the turn. As the tide rushes through the surge gullies, the kelp fronds bend like palms in a hurricane. Those creatures not firmly anchored to the rocks or weed run the risk of being swept away. The permanently attached animals, like the colonial sea fans, are flexible and give with the strong current, while those not attached have developed some remarkable ways of hanging on. This young lumpsucker prevents itself from being swept away in the tide by using specially modified fins. The fins on the fish's underside are shaped to form a sucker. The lumpsucker moves in a series of short hops along the kelp fronds. The Connemara clingfish, which despite its name is a Mediterranean species, is equipped with a ventral sucker in the same way. It also escapes the strong tides by remaining in rocky crevices, which it defends vigorously against any intruders. The sucker is really a modification of its pelvic fins, shaped to make a watertight contact with the rock. The topknot is a flatfish, but it lives in crevices instead of lying on the bottom. It uses the same principle, but in a different way. The fish pumps out the water between itself and the rock, using the fins at the rear end of its body. This creates a suction, which sticks the top knot to the rock. In order to move, the fish simply allows water to flow beneath it, breaking the suction. Where the tidal currents scour the seabed off the south of Lundy, hundreds of thousands of brittle stars cover the sea floor. Few animals can cling on here once the tide starts to run, yet 2 species of brittle star live, feed and breed in this environment. They feed by extending an arm into the current to collect the small particles of detritus being swept over them. As the current increases, the brittle stars link together some of their 5 arms to form a net covering hundreds of square yards. This saves them from being washed away, so that they can continue to feed, stretching up an arm or 2 from the living carpet. As the tide subsides, individual brittle stars climb on top of rocks to spawn. The females eject their eggs into the sea using pumping movements of the body, while the males release clouds of sperm. Each egg develops to form a free-swimming larva that will eventually settle back into the colony to form a tiny brittle star that will spend the early part of its life amid the spines of the adult. In the twilight of the deeper water, where centuries of silt have collected, a red gurnard feels its way along the seabed. The 3 pairs of legs are in fact modified fin rays, part of the pectoral fin. They're very sensitive, and the fish can detect food buried in the sand. They're also very mobile, and the gurnard can actually walk along the seabed. Small crabs are a favourite food, although sometimes they can prove a little difficult to swallow. The northern octopus begins to hunt at dusk. Like the gurnard, it's partial to crabs. The octopus lives in a lair, in this case a pile of stones. Here it lies in wait for prey, ready to pounce. A small crab ventures dangerously close to the octopus's hiding place. Those claws are no match for the powerful suckers along the octopus's arms. As the octopus strikes, it injects the crab with powerful enzymes that cause rapid paralysis, and the meal is taken back to the lair to be eaten. Only the soft parts are eaten. The crab's hard, calcareous shell is ejected. A small plaice seizes the opportunity for an easy meal, picking off the remaining flesh. An octopus won't hesitate to catch a plaice, but this one's just fed, so for the time being, the plaice is in no danger. But the octopus isn't the only predator in these waters. What looks like a feather duster is in fact a fatal lure to attract fish towards a powerful array of teeth. The anglerfish has a prodigious appetite. Plastic buckets, lobsters, and even cormorants have been found in its stomach. A fully grown specimen can be over 6 feet long. The plaice has a lucky escape. The goby, attracted to the anglerfish's waving lure, isn't so fortunate. The fish shuffles down into a shallow pit, digging itself in with fins that act like feet to await its next meal. This time, the plaice wasn't so lucky. Lundy's 2 lighthouses warn shipping away from its treacherous currents. To divers, nighttime reveals some magical creatures which are invisible without artificial light and a dark background. The dark waters spring to life and Lundy's Golden Mile becomes studded with brightly coloured jewels. They're ctenophores, or comb jellies, which drift with the current. They're transparent, but their tiny beating cilia break up the light into all the colours of the rainbow, while their tentacles trail behind in search of food. These, and all the other marine plants and animals that live here, are protected by Britain's first official marine nature reserve. The wealth beneath the sea isn't all oil. There are other natural assets too, and barring catastrophe, they'll last a lot longer. Here in the Bristol Channel, Lundy's Golden Mile is hopefully the first of many reserves for the future.
The River Severn has one of the largest estuaries in the British Isles. Like many other rivers, it's under increasing pressure from human activities around its shores. In the late 80s, the pressure threatened to become overwhelming when a plan was announced to build a barrage, a huge dam, across the mouth of the estuary to generate electricity. Because of the cost of the scheme, it was dropped, though it has never formally been abandoned. But it gave conservationists a fright and triggered a reassessment of the treasures of the Severn estuary. It is truly a magnificent asset, vital to the ecology of a wide area of Britain. The Severn Bridge is the best known of the estuary's landmarks, linking southwest England with Wales. Over 3 million people live within close proximity of the mouth of the River Severn. Fortunately, though, this is one of our few estuaries that is large enough to accommodate the often conflicting interests of industry, recreation and wildlife. large areas of the Severn have been set aside as reserves or refuges for wildlife. One is world famous. At the estuary's narrowest point is the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust at Slimbridge near Gloucester. The 520 hectares of pastures and adjoining mudflats were established in 1946 as a wildfowl refuge by Sir Peter Scott, a pioneer of conservation. Huge numbers of wildfowl of many species descend upon the many pools and lakes. Pochard, tufted duck, pintail, mallard and many others flock here in the winter to the safety of the refuge. Feeding time for these normally shy and wary birds can be a somewhat chaotic affair. During the winter, widgeon graze on the vegetation on the banks and margins of the river, an activity which at certain times of the year is not without its hazards. During the highest tides of the year, the incoming sea is funneled from the wide mouth of the estuary into the narrow Severn itself. The inrush of water halts the normal flow of the river and then pushes it back upstream in the form of a wave or bore. The bore, which can be 2 meters high, moves up the river at about 15 kilometers an hour. Beneath the travelling wave, life goes on as normal. Huge numbers of young eels, or elvers, are making their way up the river. Completely transparent and no bigger than a person's finger, they've journeyed across the Atlantic from the spawning grounds in the Sargasso Sea. From here, they'll disperse into the many smaller rivers and channels, only to pass this way again in several years' time, at the start of their long migration back to the Sargasso to breed. But many of them will never make the journey. Elver fishing is a centuries-old tradition on the upper reaches of the Severn. The special nets are designed so that the young eels, moving upstream at the water's edge, swim straight into them. Some of the elvers are eaten locally, others are exported to Japan for fattening, and some are used to restock the canals and rivers of Holland. Further downstream towards the Severn Bridge, the river widens considerably. Here, the sandbanks and mudflats provide a rich feeding ground for many species of wading birds. As the tide ebbs, the debris left behind by the receding waters is quickly snapped up by flocks of black-headed gulls. They're in their winter plumage and so lack the distinctive brown hood. Mallard, shelduck and even a few avocets gather here to search for food. Avocets are rare visitors to these waters. This group of 7 have dropped in on their winter passage south. They use their long, upturned bill to skim over the surface of the mud, delicately picking up crustaceans. The shelduck uses a different approach. It uses its beak more like a vacuum cleaner, hoovering up the mud and sifting out the edible debris. Like the avocets, many of these shelduck are visitors and use the estuary for molting. The mudflats are a safe haven while the birds cannot fly. Oyster catchers are resident here throughout the year. Although they don't actually eat oysters, they use that thick, powerful beak to probe for smaller shellfish and worms that abound in the mud. A hectare of river mud is more productive than its equivalent of our finest farmland. Worms and tiny snails are high up on the menu of the wading birds. The tide is on the turn, and the curlew will have to wait until the mudflats are exposed at the next low tide for their next meal. The difference between high and low tides may be as much as 15 metres, and the funneling effect of the estuary means that the tide comes in with a rush. It can sometimes catch people unawares. The constant movement of the tides, coupled with the mixing of the fresh river water and salty seawater, churns up vast quantities of sediment. The waters of the Severn estuary at any one time are said to hold over 10 million tonnes of mud in suspension. Not an ideal place to swim, perhaps, but the mud forms the base of the food chain on which the estuary's wildlife depends. At the height of the tide, the gulls and waders retreat to the riverbanks and surrounding fields. A party of turnstones snatches up a few last morsels before the rocks disappear. The winter population of wading birds on the Severn estuary is counted in hundreds of thousands. Knot, dunlin, whimbrel, each species uniquely adapted to feed in this rich environment, stop here to refuel on their migration south in winter and north in spring. But as well as being an important feeding ground, the Severn is a safe nighttime roost for wildfowl and wading birds alike. As night falls, a flock of Canada geese descends on the estuary from grazing grounds in the surrounding fields. Here, the geese and ducks will be safe from prowling foxes. A heron, its silhouette unmistakable, watches for fish as the sun dips below the horizon. But it's not just waders and wildfowl that roost round the estuary. Large numbers of pied wagtails have chosen a safe, if unusual, roost. The nuclear power plants around the Severn use its waters for cooling their reactors. At night, the roof of the Aubrey plant is home to between 300 and 500 pied wagtails. The Severn Bird Ringing Society makes use of this unique site to net and ring the birds. The wagtails only use the roost in winter, when the warmth of the roof provides a very comfortable sleeping place, despite the constant hum of the plant. The ornithologists hope that the results of their ringing experiments will help them to ascertain just how far afield the pied wagtails travel to roost here. If the Severn barrage had been built, the pied wagtail, with its apparent preference for man-made roosts, would have felt very little impact on its daily life. The road bridge that spans the Severn estuary at Aust near Bristol was built adjacent to cliffs which show that hundreds of millions of years ago, this part of the world was home to wildlife of an entirely different sort. The rocks hold the remains of plesiosaurs and ichthyosaurs, giant aquatic reptiles that swam and hunted in these waters. Although then, 200 million years ago, the climate was much warmer. Across the bridge in Wales, the estuarine mud holds the remains of more recent and certainly more familiar wildlife. The preserved tree stumps of an Iron Age forest protrude from the sticky mud. They're now festooned in seaweed. Near Magor, further west, there's evidence of Iron Age settlements on the shores of the estuary. The leg bones of a horse, 3,500 years old, are carefully excavated. The aurochs was a type of large wild cattle that Iron Age man domesticated. It's now extinct. A perfectly preserved horn lies in the mud. And a huge vertebra shows that the aurochs were much larger than today's cattle. It's even possible to tell what it had for its last meal by identifying the tiny but very tough pollen grains lodged between its teeth. West of the Severn Bridge towards Newport, the waters of the estuary are permanently salty, and the plants and animals that live here are typically marine. The silt-laden tides grind away at the soft sandstone, producing natural sculptures and rock pools. Barnacles encrust many of the boulders, emerging at high tide to filter particles from the water. Gammarus, a type of small shrimp, is a favourite food of shorebirds. A whelk, a larger relative of our garden snail, browses on the vegetation and siphons the water in order to breathe. Heavy metals, waste products of local industry around Avonmouth, collect in the soft body of the whelk. Cadmium is one of them. Just one of these normally edible mollusks contains more cadmium than is considered safe for humans to eat. However, this doesn't seem to affect the whelk. Nor does it appear to worry the hermit crab. The empty whelk shell provides a perfect home for the crustacean. What once protected the whelk's soft body now protects the crabs. But as the hermit crab grows, it will have to find a new and larger accommodation. In the middle of the Severn estuary between Weston-super-Mare and Cardiff lie the islands of Flatholme and Steepholme. Steepholme, so named because of its shape, is the nesting place of some of the river's large population of herring gulls. Lesser black-backed gulls ride the strong winds above the cliffs. During the breeding season, the island's tranquility is broken by the constant squabbling of the gulls as they argue over nest sites in the dense vegetation. The rock-strewn undergrowth is the home of the island's only reptile, the slowworm. These snake-like legless lizards are said to grow larger on Steepholme than anywhere else. but it's likely that in the absence of predators, they simply live longer and grow bigger than those on the mainland. Many of them, like this one sloughing its skin, belong to the more unusual blue-spotted variety. As a form of defence, slowworms, like many lizards, readily drop their tails. But again, because of the lack of predators, most of the slowworms on Steepholm have complete tails, which may explain why they appear larger than those on the mainland. Many of the island's plants, like this caper spurge, were brought here by the early inhabitants, the monks, who came here for peace and quiet. Wallflowers grow on the island's many ruins. Later residents left behind larger objects. The cannon dates from the Napoleonic Wars. Steepholm's most famous plant is the peony. This one specimen is the only wild peony growing in Britain. The site is carefully protected and the island is a nature reserve. Neighbouring Flatholm is also a nature reserve. Unlike Steepholm, the island is only a few metres above water, hence its name. Thrift covers the rocks at the sea's edge and receives a regular dousing from the waves. About 4,000 pairs each of herring gulls and lesser blackbacks nest here amid the dense ground vegetation. The only predators are the other gulls. Some of the estuary's resident shelduck population occasionally breed on the island, as do several waders, like these oyster catchers. On the mainland, to the south of Flatholm and Steepholm, there exists one of Britain's largest and most important areas of wetland. The Somerset Levels comprise some of our richest and most fascinating habitats. The whole area drains into the Severn estuary by a system of natural ditches or pills, supplemented by man-made dikes or rhines. The rhines date back several centuries and have to be cleared every 5 to 10 years. Hares are common on the pastures of the levels. Early morning, while the grass is still wet with dew, is the best time to see them. Unlike rabbits, hares don't build burrows or warrens. Instead, they lie low in shallow depressions in the grass known as forms and rely on their speed to escape predators. Redshank feed in large numbers on the nearby reservoirs, but come to the levels to breed. The dense grass provides an ideal nest site in which to raise, in this case, a single chick. This newly hatched lapwing chick is the latest addition to a large resident population. The nest is a simple, lined scrape in the ground. As man drained more and more of the Somerset Levels, the numbers of snipe here began to fall. The rushy fields where they prefer to breed turned into pasture, and the cattle created more of a disturbance to the birds on their nests. But one creature has decreased because of direct human pressure, and efforts are now being made to reintroduce it to the system of pills and rhines, where it still exists in small numbers. Otters, instead of being hunted, are now rigorously protected on the levels. The the watercourses abound with their favourite food, eels, as well as sticklebacks, frogs and insects. The eel is repeatedly taken back to the water to wash off the sticky mucus on his skin. The biggest drop in England's otter population took place in the 1950s. Pesticides washed out from agricultural land accumulated in the otter's food and built up to lethal levels in the otters themselves. Today, their numbers are but a tiny fraction of what they once were. If the plan to build the barrage had ever been carried out, it could only have spelt disaster for the Somerset levels and for the estuary's rich variety of wildlife. At least part of the levels would have had to be pumped at enormous cost if they were to be preserved at all. Wildfowl, especially those at Slimbridge, would probably have been largely unaffected. Most of them feed on the surrounding pastures and fields. The feeding grounds of the waders would have been much reduced, but what was left might have been of better quality, but no one knew for sure. It's almost certain that the amount of silt in the water would have dropped dramatically. This may have meant better water quality, but could have led to an unwanted build-up of algae. The barrage plan was shelved, but it wasn't scrapped. While it lies on the shelf, it remains a threat to one of Britain's richest and most valuable wetland areas. At least the events of the 1980s concentrated the minds of conservationists so that they'll be ready to act if this plan is ever resurrected and the threat to the magnificent Severn estuary is renewed.